3 days. That's all it took for Isabella Romano to realize her entire carefully constructed life was about to collapse like a house of cards. 3 days before Christmas. 3 days before she had to face her family's annual gathering in the Hamptons. 3 days before her mother would ask that question with those pitying eyes. So, Isabella, still no one special in your life? The words always came wrapped in concern, but underneath was the judgment, the disappointment, the unspoken accusation that, at 29, her daughter had somehow failed at the most basic requirement of womanhood: finding a man. If you want to discover how a desperate lie at a family Christmas turned into the most dangerous love story ever told, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like if you believe that sometimes the wrong person turns out to be exactly right, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence here means everything. The snow was falling thick and heavy outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the law firm where Isabella worked, transforming Manhattan into something from a postcard. But she barely noticed the beauty. Her fingers were frozen on her keyboard, the legal brief she'd been writing for the past 3 hours blurring before her eyes as panic tightened around her chest like a vice. Her phone buzzed. Another text from her mother. "Your father and I are so excited to see you, darling. And please, please, bring someone this year. You know how Uncle Vincent gets with his comments." Isabella closed her eyes, fighting back the familiar sting of tears. Uncle Vincent and his comments. Last Christmas, he'd actually asked if she was a lesbian, and when she'd said no, he'd suggested maybe she was too picky, too focused on her career, too something. The implications hung in the air like smoke, that she was defective somehow, broken, unlovable. She was none of those things. She was a successful attorney at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. She had a beautiful apartment in Tribeca, friends who loved her, a life she'd built with her own 2 hands. But none of that mattered to her family. All they saw was the empty space beside her at the dinner table. The office had mostly emptied out. It was 9 p.m. on a Friday, and normal people were at holiday parties, or cozy bars, or home with their families. But Isabella had stayed late, as always, because work was easier than facing the crushing loneliness of her apartment. That's when she heard it. A deep voice from the corridor, speaking in rapid Italian. She'd grown up hearing Italian at home, but this was different. This was the Italian of the old country, of her grandparents' generation, rough and musical and somehow dangerous. Curiosity pulled her from her desk. She grabbed her empty coffee mug as an excuse and headed toward the break room. That's where she saw him for the first time. He stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his back to her. Even from behind, he was striking. Tall, easily, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his black suit jacket perfectly. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar, and when he shifted his weight, she caught the edge of his profile. Sharp jawline, straight nose, lips moving rapidly as he spoke in that intoxicating dialect. Then he turned. Their eyes met, and Isabella forgot how to breathe. He was beautiful in a way that shouldn't exist in real life. Angular features that looked carved from marble. Dark eyes so intense they seemed to see straight through her designer blouse and pencil skirt into something deeper, something she kept hidden even from herself. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection in an otherwise perfect face, and somehow it made him even more compelling. He said something quick into the phone and ended the call, never breaking eye contact with her. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the empty break room. The air between them felt charged, electric, like right before a thunderstorm. "I'm sorry," Isabella finally managed, her voice coming out softer than intended. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't interrupt anything important," he said, and his voice was even better up close. Deep, with a slight accent that made every word sound like a caress. His English was perfect, but the Italian underneath colored it with something exotic, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. "I'm Dante," he said, moving toward her with a fluid grace that reminded her of a predator. "Dante Moretti." "Isabella Romano," she replied automatically, extending her hand. When he took it, his hand was warm, strong, and the touch sent electricity racing up her arm. He held it perhaps a moment too long, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Romano," he repeated, something flickering in his expression. "Italian?" "My grandparents came from Sicily," she said. "And yours?" "Naples, originally, though it's been many years since I've lived there." There was something in the way he said it, a weight to the words, that suggested stories she couldn't begin to imagine. "What brings you here so late?" Isabella asked, suddenly aware that she'd never seen him before, and she knew everyone who worked at the firm. "I don't work here," Dante said, the corner of his mouth lifting in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I had a meeting with one of the senior partners. Business matters." He said it vaguely, the way people do when they don't want to elaborate, and Isabella felt her lawyer instincts prickling. But before she could ask more, her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen. Another text from her mother, this one more insistent. "Darling, I need to know if you're bringing someone. I'm planning the seating arrangements." Without thinking, Isabella let out a frustrated groan. "Everything okay?" Dante asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "No," Isabella said, then laughed bitterly. "Yes. I don't know. It's complicated." "Family," Dante said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement, delivered with the certainty of someone who understood family complications intimately. Isabella looked up at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. "How did you know?" "I recognize that particular kind of stress," he said, leaning against the counter with casual elegance. "The holidays bring out the best in families. And by best, I mean the absolute worst." Despite herself, Isabella smiled. "That's exactly it. My family, they're wonderful, but they have this obsession with my relationship status, or lack thereof. Every gathering turns into an interrogation. When am I getting married? Why haven't I found someone? Am I being too picky? It's exhausting. And Christmas is the worst because everyone's trapped together for hours." Dante was watching her with those dark, intense eyes, and something in his expression made her keep talking. Things she wouldn't normally tell a stranger just poured out. "My mother keeps sending me profiles from dating apps. My uncle makes inappropriate comments. My cousins, who all married young, look at me with this mixture of pity and superiority. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being made to feel like I'm somehow less than because I chose to focus on my career instead of desperately hunting for a husband." She stopped abruptly, embarrassed by the outburst. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Because sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than people who know us," Dante said quietly. "There's no judgment, no history, just honesty." Isabella studied him more carefully. There was something about Dante Moretti that didn't quite add up. His suit was clearly bespoke, probably cost more than she made in a month. His watch was a Patek Philippe, the kind that started at 6 figures. His shoes were Italian leather, handmade. This wasn't just a successful businessman. This was serious wealth. But more than that, there was an air about him, a sense of coiled power, of danger carefully contained. The way he held himself, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, even while focused on her, the small bulge under his jacket that might have been nothing but might have been something more. "What kind of business are you in?" she asked. "Import and export," he said smoothly. Too smoothly. My family has various interests: restaurants, real estate, shipping. The usual. The usual for whom? Isabella wanted to ask, but didn't. Instead, she found herself saying something completely insane. Can I ask you something crazy? Dante's eyebrow, the one with the scar, lifted slightly. I find crazy questions are usually the most interesting ones. Would you consider being my fake boyfriend for one night? The words came out in a rush, and the moment they did, Isabella wanted to take them back. Her face flushed hot with embarrassment. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. Forget it. That was completely inappropriate. I should go. She moved to leave, but Dante's hand shot out, gently catching her wrist. Not grabbing, just touching. Just enough to stop her. Wait, he said. Tell me more. Isabella's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. I have this family Christmas gathering in 3 days. The Hamptons. My entire extended family will be there, and they're all going to ask about my love life. And I just thought, maybe if I showed up with someone, they'd finally leave me alone. But it's crazy. You're a complete stranger. This is insane. Forget I said anything. Dante hadn't let go of her wrist. His thumb was resting against her pulse point, and she wondered if he could feel how fast her heart was racing. What would this arrangement entail? He asked, his voice low and serious. Just one evening? Isabella nodded, barely daring to hope. One evening. Christmas Eve dinner, a few hours maximum. You just have to pretend to be my boyfriend. We'd need a story about how we met, how long we've been together. But that's it. Nothing more. And what do I get in return? Isabella's stomach dropped. Of course, she'd been so focused on her own desperation that she hadn't thought about what he might want. I could pay you, she said quickly. I know that sounds terrible, but I have some savings. His expression shifted, something dark and almost offended flickering across his features. I don't want your money, Isabella. Then what? She asked, confused. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. Then that half-smile returned, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes, but somehow made him even more attractive. How about this? You be my fake girlfriend for one of my family obligations, and I'll be your fake boyfriend for yours. A fair trade, Isabella blinked. You need a fake girlfriend? Even someone who looks like you? Especially someone who looks like me, Dante said cryptically. My family has certain expectations, certain people they think I should be with. Having someone unexpected, someone real and accomplished and beautiful, someone who isn't from my world, that would solve some problems for me. Beautiful. The word hung in the air between them, and Isabella felt heat creeping up her neck. So we help each other, she said slowly. Exactly. No money, no obligations beyond the agreed-upon events. Just two people solving each other's problems. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? Isabella looked at his hand, then up at his face. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. He was a stranger. She knew nothing about him beyond his name and his vague business description. This could go wrong in 1,000 different ways. But the desperate, tired part of her, the part that was so sick of being pitied and judged and found wanting, that part was louder. She took his hand. Deal. His grip was firm, warm, and when he smiled this time, it reached his eyes. They crinkled slightly at the corners, transforming his face from merely beautiful to absolutely devastating. We should exchange numbers, he said, pulling out his phone, and probably meet before the actual events. Get our stories straight. Make it convincing. Right, Isabella said, trying to sound professional, even though her hand was still tingling from his touch. When is your family thing? New Year's Eve, Dante said. My mother is hosting a party. Very formal, very traditional. You'll need an evening gown. I can arrange for one if needed. I have dresses, Isabella said, slightly defensive. I do attend formal events. Of course, Dante said smoothly, but there was amusement in his eyes. I meant no offense. It's just that my mother has very specific tastes. Very old world. She'll be scrutinizing everything. Great, Isabella muttered. No pressure. They exchanged numbers, and Dante typed something into his phone. I'm sending you my address. Come by tomorrow, around noon. We'll have lunch and work out the details. We need to be convincing. Your address, Isabella said, suddenly nervous. Wouldn't it be better to meet somewhere public? Dante studied her for a moment, and she could see him weighing how much to tell her. Isabella, he said carefully, I'm going to be honest with you because if we're going to do this, there needs to be trust between us. My life is complicated. There are people who watch me, who track my movements. If we're going to sell this relationship to our families, we need to be comfortable with each other, and that means privacy. People who watch you? Isabella's lawyer instincts were firing on all cylinders now. What kind of business did you say you were in? Import and export, Dante repeated, but this time his voice carried a warning. And I think that's all you need to know for now. If that makes you uncomfortable, we can end this arrangement right here. Isabella should have walked away. Every professional instinct told her this man was involved in something questionable, possibly illegal. But there was something in his eyes, a strange kind of honesty even in his evasiveness, that made her trust him despite her better judgment. Tomorrow at noon, she said. Send me the address. Dante's smile was approving. I'll have my driver pick you up. That's not necessary. It is, he said firmly. Where I live isn't easy to find. And besides, if we're dating, I would never let you take a cab. The old-fashioned chivalry in his tone should have seemed ridiculous, but instead it sent a warm flutter through her stomach. Fine, she said. My address is... He already had his phone out, ready to type. She gave him her Tribeca address, and his eyebrows rose slightly. Nice neighborhood. I do all right, Isabella said with a small smile. Dante laughed, a real laugh this time, deep and genuine. I'm sure you do. He glanced at his watch, that obscenely expensive Patek Philippe. I should go. My driver is waiting. But Isabella, one more thing. Yes? When we're together, in front of our families, we need to be believable. That means we need to be comfortable with each other. Comfortable touching, comfortable with affection. Is that going to be a problem? Isabella's mouth went dry. His dark eyes were locked on hers, intense and searching. No, she managed. No problem. Good, he said softly, and then he did something that made her breath catch. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. Because you're a beautiful woman, Isabella Romano, and it won't be hard to pretend I'm falling for you. Then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her want to follow him like a magnet pulled to steel. Isabella stood in the empty break room, her hand pressed to her cheek where he'd touched her, and wondered what the hell she'd just agreed to. The next morning, Isabella changed her outfit 4 times before Dante's driver arrived. She told herself it didn't matter what she wore, this was just a business arrangement. But her hands kept shaking as she tried on different combinations. Finally, she settled on dark jeans, a cream cashmere sweater, and her good boots. Casual, but put together. Professional, but approachable. At exactly noon, her doorman called up. Miss Romano, there's a driver here for you. Isabella grabbed her purse and headed downstairs, expecting a town car. What waited at the curb was a black Mercedes S-Class with tinted windows. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stood beside the rear door. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and the kind of alert eyes that suggested military or security background. "Miss Romano," he said with a slight accent. "I'm Marco. Mr. Moretti sent me." He opened the door, and Isabella slid into the leather interior. The car smelled of expensive leather and luxury. Marco got in the front, and they pulled smoothly into Manhattan traffic. "Where exactly are we going?" Isabella asked. "Mr. Moretti has a residence in Brooklyn," Marco said. "Red Hook, the waterfront." Isabella knew Red Hook. It was an interesting neighborhood, still industrial in parts, but increasingly gentrified, with converted warehouses and stunning views of the Statue of Liberty. But it was also relatively isolated, away from the hustle of Manhattan. They drove over the Brooklyn Bridge, and Isabella watched the city unfold around her. The morning was crisp and clear, the sky that particular shade of winter blue that made everything look sharp and defined. When they finally pulled up to Dante's building, Isabella's breath caught. It wasn't an apartment building. It was an entire converted warehouse right on the waterfront, 4 stories of red brick and huge industrial windows, completely private. "This is where he lives?" she asked. "One of his properties," Marco said neutrally. He opened her door, and Isabella stepped out onto the cobblestone drive. The building was stunning, the kind of place that would cost tens of millions in this market. Before she could process what that meant, about Dante's wealth, the front door opened. Dante stood in the doorway, and Isabella's heart did something complicated in her chest. He was dressed more casually than last night, dark jeans and a black sweater that hugged his muscular frame. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just showered, and in the bright morning light, he was even more devastating than he'd been in the dim office. "Isabella," he said, and the way he said her name, rolling the syllables with that slight Italian accent, made something warm pool in her lower belly. "Welcome." She walked toward him, very aware of Marco's presence behind her, of the cameras she could see mounted discreetly on the building, of the sense that this was a world she was stepping into without fully understanding the rules. "Thank you for having me," Isabella said, and immediately felt foolish. This wasn't a social call. This was a business arrangement. But Dante smiled as if she'd said something charming. "Come in. It's cold out here." The interior of the warehouse took her breath away. The ground floor was completely open, a massive space with 20-foot ceilings, exposed brick walls, and those huge windows that flooded everything with light. The furniture was minimal but clearly expensive, modern pieces in blacks and grays and creams. Abstract art hung on the walls, pieces she recognized from galleries in Chelsea. A modern kitchen occupied one corner, all stainless steel and marble counters. "This is incredible," Isabella said, turning slowly to take it all in. "Thank you," Dante said, watching her reaction with clear pleasure. "I had it converted about 5 years ago. I like space, privacy." "I can imagine," Isabella said, then caught herself. That probably sounded judgmental. She turned to face him. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "It's fine," Dante interrupted gently. "You're right to be cautious. You barely know me. You're in my home. This whole situation is unusual. That's putting it mildly," Isabella said, but she was smiling. Dante laughed. "Come, let's eat. We have a lot to discuss." He led her to a dining area where the table was already set for 2. As they sat, a woman emerged from the kitchen, older, perhaps 60, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "This is Rosa," Dante said. "She's been with my family since I was a child. She helps run the house." Rosa set down plates of pasta, perfectly prepared carbonara with crispy guanciale and a rich egg sauce. The smell alone made Isabella's mouth water. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. "Eat," Rosa said firmly, in the same tone Isabella's grandmother had used. "You're too thin. Both of you." Then she disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving them alone. Your family sounds as concerned about your relationship status as mine, Isabella said, twirling pasta on her fork. Dante's expression darkened slightly. My family's concerns are more complicated than that. But yes, they have opinions about who I should be with. Isabella took a bite of the pasta and nearly moaned. It was perfect, rich and creamy, and exactly right. This is incredible. Rosa is the best, Dante agreed. He ate with the casual elegance of someone who'd grown up with good food, proper table manners deeply ingrained. So, Isabella said after a few bites, should we start with our cover story? How did we meet? Dante set down his fork, his dark eyes focusing on her, with that intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. Let's start with the truth and adjust from there. We met at your law firm. You were working late. I was there for a business meeting. We ran into each other in the break room. I was struck by you immediately. The last part made Isabella's cheeks warm. And I found you interesting, she said carefully. Interesting, Dante repeated, amused. I can work with interesting. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. How long have we been together? 3 months, Isabella suggested. Long enough to be serious, but not so long that people would expect us to be living together or engaged. Dante nodded. 3 months. So that means we started seeing each other in September. Early fall. First date? Isabella thought about it. You took me to dinner, somewhere in Little Italy, traditional family style. You wanted to impress me with your heritage. Dante smiled. And did I? Impress you? The food was good, Isabella said teasingly. The company was acceptable. Acceptable, Dante said dryly. You're very generous with your praise. Isabella grinned. Fine. You were charming. Funny. You told me stories about growing up in Naples, about your family. You were a perfect gentleman, even though I suspect you're not always a gentleman. His expression shifted, something dangerous and amused flickering in his eyes. You're perceptive. No, not always. But with you, I would be. Would be, Isabella noted. Or will be. For this arrangement. We're pretending, remember? Right, Isabella said, but something in her chest tightened. Pretending. They spent the next hour building out their story. Isabella learned, or rather, invented, details about their relationship. They'd been exclusive from the second date because Dante didn't share. They'd spent weekends exploring the city, trying new restaurants, visiting museums. Isabella had met Rosa, but not his family yet, which was why New Year's Eve was significant. Dante had met Isabella's best friend Claire, but not her family, which was why Christmas Eve mattered. What do your parents do? Dante asked. My father is a retired accountant, Isabella said. Very traditional, very by the book. My mother was a teacher before she retired. They live in Westchester, bought their house 40 years ago and never left. They're good people, conservative but kind, and they desperately want grandchildren. Do you want children? The question was direct, unexpected, and far too personal for a fake relationship. But Isabella found herself answering honestly. Someday, maybe, if I meet the right person. But I'm not desperate for it. I like my life. My career matters to me. That probably sounds selfish to someone from a traditional Italian family. Dante shook his head. It sounds honest. And honest is rare. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. Excuse me for a moment. He stood and walked to the far side of the warehouse, speaking in rapid Italian. Isabella couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone. Cold, authoritative, slightly threatening. It was a side of Dante she hadn't seen yet, and it sent a chill down her spine. When he returned, his expression had smoothed out, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Everything okay? She asked carefully. Business, he said shortly. Then, seeming to catch himself, he softened slightly. Nothing for you to worry about. But it made Isabella worry. What had she gotten herself into? As if reading her thoughts, Dante sat back down and looked at her seriously. Isabella, I need you to understand something. My family, they're not like yours. They're complicated. There are expectations, traditions, rules that might not make sense to you. But I promise you'll be safe. No one will hurt you or disrespect you. I'll make sure of that. Why do I feel like there's a lot you're not telling me? Because there is, Dante said simply. The honesty of it startled her. Most people would have deflected, made excuses, offered reassurances. But Dante just stated it plainly, as if honesty, even partial honesty, was more respectful than comfortable lies. Can I ask you something? Isabella said carefully. Dante nodded, his dark eyes watchful. Are you dangerous? He was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella could see him weighing his response. Finally, he said, I can be. But not to you. Never to you. It should have scared her. Maybe it did scare her, a little. But there was something about the way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, that made her believe him. The rest of lunch passed more easily. They talked about safer topics, music and books and travel. Isabella learned that Dante spoke 5 languages, that he'd lived in Naples until he was 15, that he loved opera but hated musicals. She told him about law school, about her small circle of close friends, about her guilty pleasure for terrible reality television. By the time Rosa cleared their plates, Isabella felt like she knew him, at least the version of him he was willing to show her. And despite all the warning signs, all the red flags waving frantically in her mind, she liked him. Dante walked her to the door as Marco pulled the car around. We should practice, he said suddenly. Practice what? Being a couple. We need to be comfortable with each other. With touching. Before Isabella could respond, Dante stepped closer, not crowding her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that intoxicating cologne again. May I? He asked softly. Isabella's heart was pounding. Yes. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his hands. His palms were warm, slightly rough, and the touch sent electricity racing through her entire body. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and he studied her face, as if memorizing every detail. You're beautiful, he said quietly. When I tell you that in front of my family, I want you to believe I mean it. Isabella started, but her voice came out breathy and uncertain. His face was so close to hers now, close enough that she could see the individual eyelashes framing those dark eyes, could count the faint freckles on his olive skin. If I kissed you right now, he murmured, would you pull away? Isabella couldn't breathe. She should say yes. She should step back, maintain professional distance, remember this was fake, just pretend, nothing real. But the word that came out was, no. Dante's eyes darkened with something that looked like hunger, like satisfaction, like triumph. His thumb traced her lower lip, and Isabella's eyes fluttered closed. But he didn't kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. Not yet, he whispered. When I kiss you, Isabella, it won't be for practice. Then he stepped back, and Isabella nearly stumbled from the sudden absence of his heat. Marco was waiting by the car. Dante opened the door for her himself, the perfect gentleman again. I'll pick you up Monday morning, he said. 9 a.m. Bring an overnight bag. We're going to the Hamptons together. Your family is expecting us for a pre-Christmas Eve lunch on Monday. They are? Isabella asked, confused. She didn't remember mentioning that. Your mother texted you about it this morning, Dante said calmly. You were going to cancel, but I convinced you we should go. How do you know my mother texted me? I told you, Dante said, something dark and amused in his eyes. I pay attention. The drive back to Manhattan passed in a blur. Isabella's mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had happened. She should have been scared. Dante was clearly involved in something questionable. He had people watching him. He knew things he shouldn't know. He could be dangerous. But all she could think about was the feeling of his hands on her face, the heat of his body close to hers, the promise in his words. When I kiss you, it won't be for practice. Monday morning came too quickly. Isabella had packed and repacked her overnight bag 3 times, unable to decide what to bring. Finally, she settled on casual clothes for the drive, a nice dress for lunch with her family, and her warmest coat. At exactly 9 a.m., her doorman called up. Dante was waiting in the lobby. Isabella took a deep breath, grabbed her bag, and headed downstairs. He was leaning against the wall by the elevators, dressed in dark jeans, a black sweater, and a long wool coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. When he saw her, his face transformed with a smile that made her knees weak. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, Isabella said. Dante took her bag without asking, slinging it over his shoulder as if it weighed nothing, and guided her outside with a hand at the small of her back. The touch was light, almost casual, but it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. The same Mercedes was waiting, Marco behind the wheel, but this time, Dante slid into the back seat beside her. As they pulled into traffic, heading toward the tunnel that would take them out to Long Island, Dante turned to her. Nervous? Terrified, Isabella admitted. My mother is going to interrogate you. My father is going to be quietly judging everything. My uncle is going to make inappropriate comments, and everyone is going to be watching to see if you're good enough. Good enough for what? For me. For our family. For the life they think I should have. Dante reached over and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. His hand was warm, strong, and the gesture felt natural, comfortable, as if they'd held hands 1,000 times before. Then we'll show them I am, he said simply. The drive took about 2 hours. They talked easily, continuing to build their story, but also just talking. Dante asked about her work, seemed genuinely interested in the cases she was handling. Isabella asked careful questions about his business, and while he was vague on specifics, he told her about the challenges of managing multiple enterprises, about difficult employees, and demanding clients. The Hamptons' house was exactly as Isabella remembered it, a large colonial-style home her parents had saved for years to buy, back when the Hamptons were still attainable for upper-middle-class families. White with black shutters, a wide front porch, dormers on the 2nd floor. It was beautiful in a traditional, understated way. Several cars were already parked in the driveway. Her aunt and uncle had arrived early, as always. Isabella felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Last chance to back out, she said, only half joking. Dante squeezed her hand. I don't back out of commitments, Isabella. Neither do I, she admitted. Then let's do this. He got out first, came around to open her door, took her bag from the trunk. Every gesture was smooth, practiced, the behavior of a man who'd been raised with old-world manners. Her mother must have been watching from the window, because the front door flew open before they'd even reached the porch. Isabella, darling, her mother, Maria Romano, came rushing out in a cloud of perfume and excitement. She was small, barely 5'2", with silver-streaked dark hair and the same brown eyes as her daughter. But her attention wasn't on Isabella, it was on Dante. And who is this? Mom, Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. This is Dante, Dante Moretti, my boyfriend. The word felt strange on her tongue, but Dante played his part perfectly. He set down the bag and extended his hand to Maria with a warm smile. "Mrs. Romano, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Isabella has told me so much about you." Maria shook his hand, but was clearly too excited to maintain formality. "Please, call me Maria, and let me look at you. Oh my, Isabella, you didn't tell me he was so handsome." "Mom?" Isabella said, mortified. Maria laughed and waved her hand. Come in, both of you. Everyone is dying to meet him." The house was warm, smelling of cinnamon and pine from the Christmas tree in the living room. Isabella's father, Robert, emerged from his study. He was tall, thin, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, more reserved than his wife, but his eyes were kind. "Dad," Isabella said, "this is Dante." Robert extended his hand, and Isabella watched as the two men shook. Her father's handshake was firm, assessing, and Dante met it with equal pressure. A test, the kind fathers gave to men dating their daughters. "Mr. Romano," Dante said respectfully, "thank you for welcoming me into your home." Robert nodded slowly. "Maria tells me you're in business. What kind?" "Import and export," Dante said smoothly. "My family has various interests. Shipping, real estate, restaurants. We're diversified." "Sounds successful," Robert said neutrally. "It keeps me busy," Dante replied. Then, with perfect timing, he added, "Though Isabella keeps me busier. She's taught me that there's more to life than work." It was exactly the right thing to say. Robert's expression softened slightly, and Maria practically glowed. "Come meet everyone else," Maria said, taking Dante's arm as if he were already part of the family. The living room was full. Uncle Vincent and Aunt Teresa, both in their 60s, loud and opinionated. Isabella's cousins, Angela and Marie, both married with children. Angela's husband, Tom. Marie's husband, Greg. A chaos of noise and warmth and family. Everyone stopped talking when Dante entered the room. You could have heard a pin drop. Isabella understood why. Dante looked like he'd stepped out of a movie. Tall, dark, devastatingly handsome, with an air of quiet power that commanded attention. In his expensive clothes, with his perfect posture, and that slight accent, he was exotic, sophisticated, completely out of place in their comfortable, ordinary home. "Everyone," Maria announced proudly. "This is Dante, Isabella's boyfriend." The reaction was immediate. Angela and Marie exchanged glances that clearly said, "Where did she find him?" Uncle Vincent stood up, already sizing Dante up with the blunt assessment of someone who had no filter. "Dante Moretti," Dante said, moving forward to shake hands with each person. Vincent gripped his hand hard, the same test Robert had given. "You Italian?" he asked bluntly. "I am," Dante said calmly. "From Naples, originally." "Good," Vincent said, as if that settled something important. "We're Sicilian." "What part of Sicily?" "My grandparents were from Palermo," Dante said. Vincent's eyes sharpened. Palermo. What were their names? Dante didn't hesitate. Giovanni and Lucia Romano. Vincent was quiet for a moment, and Isabella saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition? Surprise? But then he nodded. "Romano. Good family. Sit. Tell me about this business of yours." The afternoon passed in a blur. Dante was perfect. He charmed Maria by complimenting her cooking, engaged Robert in a discussion about economics and real estate markets, held his own with Vincent's increasingly personal questions, and made Angela and Marie laugh with stories about taking Isabella to a cooking class where she'd nearly set the kitchen on fire. "That never happened," Isabella protested. "It's a creative interpretation of events." "Embellishment is the heart of good storytelling," Dante said with a grin. "You set the oven mitt on fire," Isabella corrected. "That's a significant detail to leave out." But everyone was laughing, and Isabella realized with surprise that she was having fun. Dante fit in somehow, despite being so clearly different from her family. He was respectful, but not stiff, warm, but not overfamiliar, and he played the role of devoted boyfriend, with an ease that made her almost forget it was fake. Almost. Because every time he touched her, his hand on her back or his fingers interlacing with hers, or his arm around her shoulders, she felt that electric current, that awareness that this wasn't real, but felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. After lunch, her mother pulled her into the kitchen under the guise of helping with dessert. "Isabella," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "He's wonderful." "I know, Mom. Where did you find him? And why didn't you tell us about him sooner?" "We wanted to be sure," Isabella said, the lies coming easier now, "that it was serious before introducing him to everyone." "But he loves you," her mother said with absolute certainty. "I can see it in the way he looks at you. Like you're the only person in the room." Isabella's throat tightened. "Mom, don't. Don't read too much into it." "Too late," Maria said, wiping her eyes. "I'm already planning the wedding in my head. Your father likes him too, which is saying something. You know how protective he is." "Please don't," Isabella begged. "Just let us see where this goes. We're taking it slow." Maria hugged her daughter tightly. "I'm just so happy for you, darling. You deserve someone who sees how special you are." When they returned to the living room with coffee and cannoli, Isabella found Dante deep in conversation with her father and Uncle Vincent. They were speaking in Italian, rapid and comfortable, and both older men were nodding with approval. "What are they talking about?" Isabella asked Angela quietly. Her cousin shrugged. "No idea. But Vincent looks impressed. And Vincent is never impressed. I don't know where you found him, but good job. He's gorgeous." "He's also kind, Angela," Isabella said, surprising herself with the defensive edge in her voice. "I didn't just pick him for his looks." Angela held up her hands. "I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just saying you did good. Really good." As the afternoon wore into evening, Isabella found herself relaxing despite her initial anxiety. Dante handled every question, every test, every subtle and not so subtle interrogation with grace and charm. When Uncle Vincent asked about his intentions, Dante said simply, "I intend to make Isabella happy for as long as she'll let me." When Aunt Teresa asked if he wanted children, Dante glanced at Isabella before answering. "That's a decision Isabella and I will make together, when we're ready." When Marie asked how they knew it was serious, Dante took Isabella's hand and said, "Because when I'm with her, everything else becomes background noise. She's the only thing that's clear." It was a perfect answer. Romantic without being over the top, sincere without revealing that it was all pretend. And the way he looked at her when he said it, his dark eyes locked on hers with that intensity that made her forget to breathe, made Isabella almost believe it herself. Finally, as people started gathering their things to leave, Maria pulled Dante aside. Isabella watched from across the room as her mother spoke to him quietly, then hugged him tightly. Whatever she said made Dante's expression soften in a way Isabella hadn't seen before. "What did my mom say to you?" Isabella asked later, as they walked to the car in the cold evening air. "That I'm good for you," Dante said quietly. "That she can see I care about you. That I'm welcome in this family any time." "Does that feel strange?" Isabella asked. "Having my family welcome you so completely into something that's not real?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, his hand warm in hers. "What if it became real?" he said softly. Isabella's heart stopped. "What?" He turned to face her in the darkness of the driveway, the porch light casting shadows across his beautiful face. "What if we stopped pretending, Isabella? What if this became something real?" "I don't understand," Isabella whispered. "Since the moment I met you," Dante said, his hands coming up to frame her face the way he had in his warehouse. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. The way you laugh, the way you bite your lip when you're nervous, the way you see through all my careful walls. This was supposed to be simple, a favor, an arrangement. But it's not simple anymore, at least not for me. Dante, Isabella breathed. I need to know, he said, his forehead pressing against hers. Are you feeling this too? Or is it just me? Isabella's mind was spinning. This was crazy. He was still essentially a stranger, involved in God knows what kind of business, dangerous in ways she didn't fully understand. But her heart knew what her mind couldn't accept. Yes, she whispered. I feel it too. Dante's breath shuddered out, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But when Isabella's hands fisted in his coat, pulling him closer, something broke loose between them. His kiss deepened, became demanding, passionate, filled with all the tension that had been building between them since that first moment in the office break room. His hands tangled in her hair, and Isabella pressed herself against the solid warmth of his body, kissing him back with a hunger that shocked her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. This complicates everything, he said, but he was smiling. I know, Isabella said. She should have been scared. This was happening too fast, too intensely. But all she felt was rightness, as if some part of her had been waiting for this, for him, without knowing it. The drive back to the city was different. Dante kept her hand clasped in his the entire way, his thumb drawing small circles on her skin. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, charged with new possibility. When they reached her building, Dante got out and walked her to the door. I'll see you Christmas Eve, he said. Pick you up at 4. Isabella nodded. And Dante? Yes? Thank you. For today. For making it easy. He smiled. That devastating smile that transformed his whole face. It was easy because of you. He kissed her again. Soft and sweet this time. A promise rather than a demand. Then he was gone, and Isabella was left standing in the cold, her lips tingling, her heart racing, wondering what the hell she'd just done. Christmas Eve arrived too quickly. Isabella spent the intervening days trying to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting to Dante. They texted constantly, quick messages that made her smile at her desk. He sent her photos of Rosa teaching him how to make homemade pasta. She sent him pictures of her attempting to wrap presents, the paper torn and tape everywhere. When are you going to tell me what your family event actually entails? She texted him on December 23rd. His response came quickly. New Year's Eve. Very formal dinner at my mother's house. You'll meet everyone who matters. That doesn't sound ominous at all, she wrote back. You'll be fine, he responded. I'll be with you. The simple reassurance made her chest feel warm. On Christmas Eve, Isabella spent extra time getting ready. She chose a deep emerald green dress that hugged her curves, sophisticated, but not too sexy for a family event. She wore her hair down in soft waves, applied makeup more carefully than usual. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked happy. Dante arrived exactly at 4. When she opened the door, he stood there holding a massive bouquet of white roses, dressed in dark slacks, and a charcoal sweater that made his olive skin look even warmer. You're beautiful, he said, and the way he said it, with such simple sincerity, made Isabella blush. You clean up pretty well yourself, she managed. He handed her the roses. These are for you. And he pulled out a smaller box from his pocket. This is for your mother. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a small cross pendant. It's beautiful, Isabella said. Dante, you didn't have to. I wanted to, he said. She welcomed me into her home. This is just respect. The gesture was so thoughtful, so unexpectedly sweet. that Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." At her parents' house, the chaos was already in full swing. The whole extended family had gathered for the traditional Christmas Eve dinner. 7 fishes, as her Sicilian grandmother had always insisted, even though the grandmother had passed years ago. The smell of cooking seafood filled the house, along with laughter and the sound of Christmas music playing in the background. Dante navigated it all with the same grace he'd shown at lunch. He helped Maria in the kitchen, ignoring her protests that he was a guest. He discussed sports with Robert and Tom and Greg. He played with Angela's and Marie's children, getting down on the floor to build towers with blocks that the kids promptly destroyed with gleeful shrieks. But throughout the evening, his attention kept returning to Isabella. His hand would find hers under the table. His eyes would seek her out across the room. When she laughed at something her cousin said, he would smile as if her happiness was his greatest achievement. After dinner, as tradition dictated, they all gathered in the living room to exchange gifts. It was mostly small things, token gifts, since the family was large, and no one expected extravagance. But when it came time for Isabella to open Dante's gift, her hands trembled slightly. Inside the elegantly wrapped box was a first edition of her favorite novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. She'd mentioned it once in passing during one of their many conversations. He'd remembered. "Dante," she whispered, running her fingers over the precious leather binding. "This is too much." "It's not enough," he said quietly, his dark eyes locked on hers. Nothing would be enough. Around them, her family pretended not to watch, but Isabella could feel their attention, their approval, their happiness for her. Later, after presents had been opened and coffee served, and her aunt had pulled out the grappa, insisting everyone have a toast, Isabella and Dante found themselves alone for a moment on the back porch. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp in the winter sky. "Thank you," Isabella said, "for being so wonderful with my family, for making this easy, for everything." Dante pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind so she could lean back against his chest. His warmth enveloped her, and Isabella closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him. "I should be thanking you," he said, his voice low and rough, "for reminding me what family is supposed to feel like." "What do you mean?" "My family," he said carefully, "is not like yours. We don't have this warmth, this easy affection. Everything comes with conditions, with expectations, with weight. This, being here with you, with them, it's like remembering something I forgot existed." Isabella turned in his arms to face him. "Tell me about your family." "Not yet," Dante said, and there was something dark in his expression. "After New Year's, after you meet them, then we'll talk. You'll understand then." "You're scaring me a little," Isabella admitted. "I'm sorry," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I don't mean to, but I need you to trust me." "Do you trust me?" Isabella knew she should say no, knew she should demand answers, full transparency, complete honesty. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made the logical part of her brain shut down. She saw a genuine feeling, real emotion, a vulnerability he was letting her see. "Yes," she said, "I trust you." "Then that's enough," Dante said, and kissed her softly. For now, that's enough. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of stolen moments. Dante came to her apartment with takeout, and they watched movies on her couch. She went to his warehouse, and he cooked for her. Simple pasta that he'd learned from Rosa. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, building something that felt substantial despite its strange foundation. They kissed often, passionate kisses that left Isabella dizzy and wanting more. But Dante never pushed, never pressured. His restraint was somehow more seductive than any aggressive pursuit would have been. On New Year's Eve morning, Dante sent a car to pick up Isabella. Inside was a garment bag and a note in his strong, angular handwriting. Wear this tonight. You'll be the most beautiful woman there. You always are. Inside the bag was a gown that made Isabella gasp. Black silk, elegant and timeless, with a neckline that was sophisticated without being revealing. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her body specifically. With it was a velvet jewelry box containing diamond earrings, simple and stunning. Isabella knew they were real, knew they probably cost more than she made in 6 months. But something about the gift didn't feel transactional. It felt like Dante dressing her in armor for the battle ahead, because that's what tonight felt like. A battle. At 7 p.m., Dante picked her up himself. He was in a tuxedo, and Isabella's breath caught at the sight of him. He looked like something out of a dream, impossibly handsome, powerful, and entirely focused on her. "You look," he started, then seemed to lose words. His eyes traveled over her slowly, with such heat that Isabella felt her skin flush. "Perfect. You look perfect." "Thank you for the dress," Isabella said. "And the earrings. They're too much." "They're not enough," Dante repeated, the same words he'd used about the book. Then he held out his hand. "Ready?" "No," Isabella admitted, "but let's go anyway." The drive was longer than she expected. They left the city entirely, heading north into Westchester. The houses got bigger, the properties more expansive, until finally they turned down a private road. At the end was a mansion, not a house, not even an estate. A mansion, 3 stories of stone and elegance, lit up like something from a movie. Isabella's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Dante, whose house is this?" "My mother's," he said quietly. "Isabella, before we go in, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him and was struck by the tension in his face. The man who'd been so confident, so self-assured, looked nervous. "My family," he started, then stopped. He took a deep breath. "My family is complicated. What I do, what they do, it's not exactly legal." Isabella's heart stopped. "What?" "I'm not a good man, Isabella," Dante said, his voice rough. "I've done things, been part of things, that you would find objectionable. My family, we're what people call the mob, the Mafia. He hesitated, then pushed forward. "I'm going to be the next head of the Moretti family." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Isabella couldn't breathe. The Mafia. He was in the Mafia. Everything suddenly made sense. The vague business descriptions, the wealth, the people watching him, the sense of danger that surrounded him like a second skin. She should run. She should demand he take her home immediately. She should be terrified. But instead, she heard herself ask, "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I was selfish," Dante said simply. "Because I wanted you to know me, the real me, before you knew what I was. Because I was afraid, if I told you too soon, you'd never give me a chance. And I needed a chance with you, Isabella. I needed it more than I've needed anything in years." "Are you in danger?" she asked. "Always," he admitted. "Are you going to put me in danger?" "Never," he said fiercely. "I'll protect you with everything I have. No one in my world will touch you. I'll make sure of it." Isabella's mind was racing. This was insane. She was a lawyer, an officer of the court. She couldn't date a mobster. It was unethical, possibly illegal, definitely dangerous. But her heart was louder than her logic. "Do you hurt innocent people?" she asked. "No," Dante said. "My family has rules. We don't involve civilians. We don't hurt women or children. We handle our business with other people in the life. It's not noble, but it's not random violence." "Do you want out?" she asked. "Can you get out?" There is no out, Dante said quietly. This is my blood, my legacy. I was born into this, and I'll die in it. But I can keep you separate from it. You'd never have to see that side of me, never have to be part of it. You'd just have to accept it exists. Isabella looked at this beautiful, dangerous man who'd been so gentle with her, so patient, so unexpectedly sweet. Every rational part of her screamed to walk away. But she thought about the way he'd charmed her family, the way he'd remembered her favorite book, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare. I should leave, she said. You should, Dante agreed. His face was carefully neutral, but she could see pain in his eyes. I won't stop you. Instead, Isabella reached over and took his hand. But I'm not going to. Dante's eyes widened. What? I'm not saying I understand. This or that, I'm okay with everything. But I'm saying I want to know more. I want to meet your family. I want to see your world. And then I'll decide. Are you sure? Dante asked, and his voice was shaking slightly. No, Isabella said honestly. But I'm sure about you. About what I feel when I'm with you. And maybe that's enough to start with. Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, he said against her hair, or the craziest. Maybe both, Isabella said, and despite everything, she was smiling. Probably both. The interior of the mansion was as impressive as the exterior. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art that Isabella recognized from museums. And people, dozens of them, all dressed in expensive evening wear, all turning to watch as Dante entered with her on his arm. Dante, a woman's voice called out. A woman approached, and Isabella immediately saw where Dante got his looks. She was perhaps 60, but elegant and beautiful, with dark hair swept up and the same intense eyes as her son. She wore diamonds, like they were casual accessories, and carried herself with the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Mama, Dante said, and his voice was different, more formal, more careful. This is Isabella Romano. Isabella, this is my mother, Francesca Moretti. Signora Moretti studied Isabella with sharp, assessing eyes. Romano, she said thoughtfully. Sicilian. My grandparents were from Palermo, Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. Francesca's expression shifted slightly. Good bloodline. Come, let me look at you properly. She circled Isabella slowly, and Isabella felt like prey being evaluated by a predator. The dress is elegant, Francesca said. Dante chose well. The diamonds are appropriate, not ostentatious. Your posture is good. You carry yourself with confidence. She paused in front of Isabella. But the question is, are you strong enough for my son? I don't know, Isabella said honestly, but I'm willing to find out. Francesca studied her for another long moment, then smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, but it wasn't hostile either. Direct. I appreciate that. Come, meet the family. The evening was surreal. Dante introduced her to uncles and cousins and associates, all with Italian names, all with that same air of controlled power. They were polite to her, respectful even, but Isabella could feel them assessing her, weighing whether she was suitable for Dante. One man in particular watched her closely. He was older, perhaps 70, with silver hair and cold eyes. He approached them during cocktail hour. Dante, he said, introduce me to your companion. Uncle Sal, Dante said, and Isabella heard the edge in his voice. This is Isabella Romano, my girlfriend. Salvatore Moretti studied Isabella with those cold eyes. You're a lawyer, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Isabella said, unsure how he knew that. And you understand what this family does? Dante told me, Isabella said, carefully. And you're not concerned? She thought about lying, about saying something diplomatic, but something in those cold eyes told her he'd see through any pretense. "I'm terrified," Isabella said honestly, "but I care about Dante more than I'm afraid." Something flickered in Salvatore's expression. Might have been approval. "Brave," he said. "Or foolish. Time will tell which." Then he walked away, leaving Isabella shaking slightly. "You did well," Dante murmured in her ear. "Uncle Sal is the hardest to impress." Dinner was formal, course after course of exquisite food. Isabella was seated between Dante and a younger man, who introduced himself as Marco, Dante's cousin. "So you're the one who finally caught Dante's attention," Marco said with a friendly smile. "He's been a ghost for years. All work, no life. It's nice to see him happy." "Has he been unhappy?" Isabella asked. Marco's expression became more serious. "Our life, it's not easy. There's pressure, expectations, danger. Dante carries more of it than most, because he's being groomed to lead. It makes relationships difficult. He doesn't trust easily." "But he trusts you," Marco said, looking at her directly. "That means something." After dinner, there was dancing. Dante led Isabella onto the floor, pulling her close as a string quartet played. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured. "They all like you." "Your Uncle Sal terrifies me," Isabella admitted. "He should," Dante said. "He's terrifying. But he respects strength, and you showed him strength." They swayed together, and Isabella let herself relax into his arms. The evening had been overwhelming, but not as terrible as she'd feared. These people were dangerous, yes, but they weren't monsters. They were a family, complicated and bound by rules she didn't fully understand, but a family nonetheless. As midnight approached, Francesca called for attention. The room quieted immediately, everyone turning to face her. She stood on a small platform, commanding the space effortlessly. "We gather tonight to welcome a new year," she said, "but also to celebrate transitions. My son Dante will officially become head of this family in the spring." The room erupted in applause. Dante's expression was carefully neutral, but Isabella felt the tension in his body. "This is a position of great responsibility," Francesca continued. "It requires strength, wisdom, and loyalty. But it also requires partnership. A man cannot lead alone. He needs a strong woman beside him." Her eyes found Isabella in the crowd. "Tonight, I've had the pleasure of meeting Isabella Romano, a woman of intelligence and courage, a woman who understands what this family is and has chosen to stand with my son, despite the risks." More applause, but now people were looking at Isabella. She felt her face flush hot. "If Dante chooses to make this relationship permanent," Francesca said, "then she has my blessing." The implications of those words crashed over Isabella like a wave. This wasn't just about dating anymore. This was about becoming part of this family, this life, permanently. The countdown to midnight began. 10, 9, 8. Dante pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. 7, 6, 5. "I know this is overwhelming," he whispered. 4, 3, 2. "But I meant what I said. I'm falling for you, Isabella." 1. The room erupted in cheers, and the sound of champagne corks popping. "Happy New Year." And Dante kissed her. Not gently, not carefully, but with a passion that took her breath away. His hands tangled in her hair, and Isabella kissed him back with equal fervor, forgetting where they were, forgetting the watching crowd, forgetting everything except the feel of his mouth on hers and the thunder of her heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella looked up into his dark eyes. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered, "even though you're completely insane. And this is the craziest situation I've ever been in." A slow smile spread across Dante's face. "So you'll stay? With me? In this mess? "I'll stay," Isabella said. "God help me, but I'll stay." The ride home was quiet. They sat in the back of the Mercedes, hands interlaced, processing everything that had happened. When they reached her building, Dante walked her to her door. "I know tonight was a lot," he said. "If you need time to think, to process." "I don't need time," Isabella interrupted. "I need you to kiss me again." Dante didn't need to be asked twice. He pulled her close, kissing her with a hunger that made her knees weak. Isabella fumbled with her keys, finally getting the door open, and they stumbled inside, still kissing. The door closed behind them, and suddenly, the careful restraint that had characterized their relationship shattered. Dante's hands were in her hair, on her back, pulling her closer. Isabella's fingers worked at his tie, his jacket, desperate to feel his skin. "Are you sure?" Dante asked, pulling back slightly to look at her. His eyes were dark with desire, but also questioning. "I'm sure," Isabella said. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bedroom as if she weighed nothing. And then there were no more words, just the sound of breathing and whispered names, and the feel of skin against skin. Later, much later, they lay tangled together in her sheets, the city lights casting shadows across the walls. Dante's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I was so careful," he said quietly, "so controlled. I told myself I wouldn't let this get complicated, that I'd keep you separate from everything dark in my life." "What changed?" Isabella asked, turning to look at him. "You," he said simply. "You changed everything. The way you see me, the way you don't flinch from who I am even when you probably should. You make me want to be better. You make me believe I can be." "You are better," Isabella said softly. "You're kind and thoughtful, and you were so patient with my family. That's who you are, Dante. The rest is just what you do." He kissed her forehead gently. "How did I get so lucky?" "You answered a desperate woman's crazy proposal in a coffee shop," Isabella said with a smile. "That's not luck. That's fate." Over the following weeks, Isabella learned to navigate Dante's world. She met more of his family, understood more about how the business worked without knowing specific details. She learned that Dante owned restaurants where she could eat for free, that he had connections everywhere, that people respected and feared him in equal measure. But she also saw the man beneath the role, the way he read to children at a community center his family funded, the way he took care of Rosa, making sure she had everything she needed, the way he remembered small details about people and followed up, showing care in unexpected ways. Her own family embraced him completely. Maria called him more than she called Isabella. Robert invited him to golf, something he did with almost no one. Uncle Vincent declared him a good Italian boy, which was the highest praise Vincent knew how to give. At work, Isabella kept the relationship quiet, uncertain how her firm would react to her dating someone with Dante's reputation. But her best friend Claire knew, and was horrified and fascinated in equal measure. "You're dating a mobster," Claire said over coffee one Saturday. "A literal mobster." "I know," Isabella said. "It's complicated." "Complicated? It's insane. What if something happens? What if he goes to prison? What if—" Claire hesitated. "What if something worse happens?" "I know the risks," Isabella said quietly. "I think about them every day. But Claire, when I'm with him, I feel more alive than I ever have. He sees me, really sees me, in a way no one else ever has. And I see him. Not just the dangerous parts, but the good parts too. And there are so many good parts." Claire studied her friend's face, then sighed. "You love him." "I do," Isabella admitted. "I love him." On Valentine's Day, Dante took Isabella to an empty restaurant, one his family owned. The entire place was closed except for them, decorated with candles and roses. Rosa had prepared a feast, course after course of perfect Italian food. As they ate, Dante seemed nervous. He kept shifting in his seat, his usual confidence replaced with uncertainty. "What's wrong?" Isabella asked. "Nothing's wrong," Dante said. "Everything is right. That's what scares me." He stood up, and Isabella's heart started pounding because she recognized this moment. She'd seen it in movies, dreamed about it, but never thought it would happen to her like this. "Isabella Romano," Dante began, and his voice was shaking. "6 weeks ago, you walked into my life with a crazy proposal. Be your fake boyfriend, make your family happy, keep things simple. But nothing about you has been simple. You've turned my entire world upside down. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I'm capable of, about what I deserve." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Isabella's hands flew to her mouth. "I'm not a good man," Dante continued. "I'm dangerous and complicated, and my life will never be normal. But I love you. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't want to spend another day pretending this is temporary or fake, or anything less than completely real." He opened the box, revealing a ring. Not ostentatious, but stunning. An emerald, surrounded by diamonds. "I chose emerald," he said, "because it matches the dress you wore at Christmas, the night I knew I was falling in love with you." Isabella was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Will you marry me?" Dante asked. "Will you take this dangerous, complicated life and make it yours? Will you be my partner, my strength, my everything?" "Yes," Isabella sobbed. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Dante slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into his arms. They held each other tightly, both crying, both laughing, both overwhelmed by the impossibility and the rightness of this moment. "I love you," Isabella whispered against his chest. "I love you so much. I'll spend every day of my life proving I'm worthy of that," Dante promised. The wedding happened in late spring, a blend of both their worlds. Traditional Catholic ceremony in a small church, reception at one of Dante's family properties. Isabella's family mingled with Dante's, two very different worlds finding common ground in celebration. Maria cried through the entire ceremony. Robert walked Isabella down the aisle with pride evident in every step, and when Dante lifted her veil, his hands were steady, but his eyes were wet with tears. "I see you," he whispered, repeating words that had become their private promise. "And I choose you. Always." The reception was magical. They danced under strings of lights as the sun set over the garden. Dante's family gave speeches that were equal parts, threatening to anyone who might hurt Isabella and welcoming her to the fold. Isabella's family gave speeches about how Dante had brought light back to their daughter's eyes. And when Dante and Isabella shared their first dance as husband and wife, the world fell away until it was just the two of them, swaying together, promises whispered against skin. Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy. Dante showed her Naples, the narrow streets where he'd grown up, the restaurant his grandfather had started that had been the family's first legitimate business. They visited the Amalfi Coast, swam in impossibly blue water, ate food that made Isabella weep with pleasure. On their last night, sitting on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, Dante pulled Isabella close. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Saying yes to me? To this life?" Isabella thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the complications, the constant awareness that danger lurked at the edges of their happiness. But she also thought about waking up next to him every morning, about the way he looked at her, like she hung the moon, about building a life that was unconventional but entirely theirs. "Not even for a second," she said. "You? Never," Dante said fiercely. "You're the best decision I ever made." They returned to New York and settled into married life. Isabella continued practicing law, though she'd moved to a smaller firm that asked fewer questions. Dante took over leadership of the family officially, and Isabella watched him navigate that responsibility with wisdom and care. She learned to live with the security, the careful vetting of anyone who came into their lives, the constant undercurrent of danger. But she also learned the strength of the bonds Dante's family created. When her mother got sick, Dante's family rallied around her parents with the same fierce protectiveness they showed their own. When Isabella faced a difficult case, Dante's connections provided resources she wouldn't have had otherwise. Their worlds blended more than she'd thought possible. A year after the wedding, Isabella told Dante she was pregnant. He cried, something she'd only seen him do a handful of times. Their daughter was born in February, dark-eyed and beautiful, and they named her Lucia, after Dante's grandmother, and Maria, after Isabella's mother. Watching Dante hold their tiny daughter, seeing the fierce love and protectiveness in his eyes, Isabella understood fully the man she'd married. He was capable of darkness, yes, but also capable of tremendous love. And he chose, every single day, to lead with love when it came to her and their child. Sometimes, late at night, when Lucia was sleeping and they were alone, Isabella would think back to that moment in the office break room. A desperate woman making a crazy proposal to a beautiful stranger. How could she have known that one impulsive question would change everything? That fake would become real? That a Christmas lie would transform into a lifetime of truth? Dante would catch her smiling at these memories. "What are you thinking about?" he'd ask. "How it all started," Isabella would say. "The fake engagement, the desperate plan, the impossibility of us." And he would pull her close and whisper, "Nothing about us was ever fake, Isabella. Maybe the circumstances were. But what I felt from that first moment, that was always real. I was just waiting for you to catch up." Years passed. Lucia grew, joined by a son they named Roberto after Isabella's father. The children grew up knowing both worlds, learning Italian and respect for family and the value of loyalty. They attended Isabella's family gatherings, where cousins played and Maria made too much food. And they attended Dante's family functions, where traditions were observed with ritual precision. Isabella became known in the family as Dante's conscience, the one person who could challenge him when he was being too harsh or too rigid. He trusted her judgment completely, often bringing her into discussions about family business in ways that would have been unthinkable for previous generations. She never involved herself in the criminal aspects, maintaining that boundary carefully. But she helped him find ways to move the family toward more legitimate enterprises without abandoning the people who depended on them. On their 10th anniversary, Dante took Isabella back to the same restaurant where he'd proposed. The same candles, the same setup, Rosa's same perfect food. But this time, Isabella had a surprise of her own. She handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," she said, smiling mysteriously. Inside were documents, formal legal papers. Dante read through them, confusion clearing to understanding, then to disbelief. "You bought the building? The coffee shop where we first met?" Isabella nodded. It was going to be torn down, turned into luxury condos. I couldn't let that happen. That place changed my life, changed both our lives. So I bought it. I thought maybe we could turn it into something for the community, a place where people can meet, connect, maybe find their own impossible love stories. Dante was crying again, those rare tears that only she ever saw. "How did I get so lucky?" "Same way I did," Isabella said, taking his hands. "We both took a chance on something impossible. And we chose each other every single day since. That's not luck, amore. That's commitment. That's love." They renovated the coffee shop together, turning it into a community center and cafe. On the wall, in a small frame, they hung a plaque that read, "Where it all began, with the date they'd first met. Young couples would come in and ask about it, and the staff would smile and say it was a love story. The details didn't matter. The lesson did. Sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person you'd never think you'd end up with turns out to be exactly who you needed. Sometimes a desperate lie becomes the truest thing you ever said. Isabella in Dante's story wasn't perfect. There were hard days, scary moments, times when the darkness of his world threatened to overwhelm them. But through it all, they held on to each other. They chose each other. They built a life that was unconventional, but deeply happy. And whenever someone asked Isabella if she regretted that impulsive proposal, that crazy question to a beautiful stranger, she would smile and say the same thing every time. Best decision I ever made. Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest question. Will you help me? Will you stand beside me? Will you be mine? And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the answer is yes. Not just for one night, not just for appearances, but for always. Isabella Romano had walked into that break room expecting nothing more than coffee. She'd walked out having met the love of her life. And Dante Moretti, the man who everyone feared, who carried darkness and danger like shadows, had found the one person who could see through all of that to the man underneath. The man who just wanted to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved. In the end, they gave each other exactly what they needed. She gave him light. He gave her safety. Together, they built something neither could have created alone. A love that was real, fierce, protective, and absolutely unbreakable. And it all started with a lie that became the truest thing either of them had ever known.